Ma'am, you can't enter. 5 words that would change everything at Fort Henderson. 5 words spoken to a woman in jeans and a ponytail. 5 words that had no idea they were being said to the base's new commanding officer. But let's back up, because this story, it starts with a choice. Colonel Sarah Martinez stood in her hotel room that morning, staring at 2 outfits. On the left, her crisp dress uniform with its rows of ribbons and polished insignia. On the right, simple civilian clothes, white blouse, dark jeans, comfortable shoes. Most officers would have chosen the uniform. Show up in full military glory. Make an entrance. Demand respect from the first moment. Sarah chose the jeans. Why? Because she wanted to see the truth. The unvarnished, uncomfortable truth about what Fort Henderson had become. And you can't see the truth when everyone's standing at attention, can you? At 38, Sarah had already turned around 2 struggling bases. She'd earned a reputation. Firm but fair, innovative, dedicated. Her soldiers didn't just follow orders. They believed in her. That's rare in the military. That's what made her dangerous to the old guard, the traditionalists who'd whispered in Pentagon corridors that maybe, just maybe, someone like her wasn't ready for Fort Henderson. Those whispers only made her more determined. The morning sun was bright as she approached the main gate. Long shadows stretched across the pavement. 2 guards stood at the checkpoint. And here's what Sarah noticed immediately. They weren't ready. Not mentally, not physically, not professionally. Private Johnson, 22 and fresh from the academy, was mid-story about his weekend plans. Sergeant Williams, only slightly older but carrying himself like he owned the place after 3 years at this post, was barely listening. Coffee cups in hand, eyes unfocused, posture slack. The gatehouse windows were dirty. Cigarette butts littered the ground beneath a no-smoking sign. The American flag hanging nearby was wrinkled, improperly folded from the night before. Sarah had seen enough struggling bases to know what these details meant. This wasn't just 2 lazy guards. This was systemic failure. This was what happens when standards disappear, when leadership vanishes, when nobody cares anymore. Fort Henderson housed 5,000 personnel, 5,000 soldiers and their families, schools, hospitals, training grounds, a small city in uniform. And it was broken. The previous commander had been relieved after incidents that made national headlines. Morale was in the basement. Retention rates were terrible. Disciplinary problems were climbing. Training scores were falling. Fort Henderson had become the place where careers went to die. Sarah was here to fix it. Starting now. Starting with these 2 guards who still hadn't noticed her approach. "Excuse me," she said. Calm. Professional. Just enough authority to cut through their conversation without being aggressive. Private Johnson looked up with annoyance, as if she'd interrupted something important. Sergeant Williams barely glanced her direction before returning to his paperwork. No salute. No attention. No professionalism whatsoever. "Can I help you?" Johnson's tone suggested helping visitors was an inconvenience. He didn't stand. His uniform was wrinkled. His hair too long. Coffee stain on his shirt that he'd stopped noticing days ago. Sarah pulled out her military ID and transfer orders. Placed them on the counter. Waited. Watched Johnson's face as he picked them up reluctantly. Studied him as his eyes moved over the documents. Wondered how long it would take. "Ma'am, this says you're a colonel." Confusion in his voice. Not recognition. "But you're not in uniform. I'm going to need to verify this with my supervisor." Now Williams was paying attention. The word colonel had that effect. He reached for her credentials with skepticism written all over his face. Took in her civilian clothes, her casual appearance, her complete lack of military bearing. "Let me see those," he said, like he expected fraud. Sarah stayed calm. Patient. This was going exactly as she'd anticipated. Williams examined the papers more carefully now. She could see him trying to reconcile what he was reading with what he was seeing. The orders were clear. Colonel Sarah Martinez was to assume command of Fort Henderson effective immediately. But Williams couldn't accept it. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but I can't let you on base without proper verification." He was choosing his words carefully now. "These orders look legitimate, but you're not in uniform. And we don't have any notification about a new commanding officer arriving today. I need to call the base commander's office." "That's fine, Sergeant." Sarah's voice was understanding. "I appreciate you following security protocols, even if they could be implemented with a bit more military bearing." Did you catch that? That gentle knife sliding between the ribs? Both guards straightened slightly. starting to realize they were being evaluated by someone who understood military standards better than they did. While Williams made his call, Sarah took inventory. The security booth was a disaster. Personal items everywhere. Empty food containers. Magazines that had nothing to do with military duties. The visitor log was days behind. The communication equipment looked like it hadn't been maintained in months. She could hear Williams on the phone, his confusion growing with every sentence. "Yes, sir. I have a woman here claiming to be Colonel Martinez." "No, sir. She's not in uniform." "Yes, sir. The orders look real, but—" Long pause. Johnson was studying her now. Really looking. Beginning to understand he might have made a mistake. He tried to straighten his uniform, improve his posture. Too late for first impressions, though, wasn't it? The phone conversation stretched on. Williams becoming more uncomfortable with each passing second. His voice changing. More respectful. Using sir more frequently. His face going pale. Finally, he hung up. Turned back to Sarah. Completely different demeanor now. Hands shaking as he returned her documents. "Ma'am, there seems to have been a communication error. The base commander's office confirms your identity and your orders." Sarah took her credentials back. Expression unchanged. "Thank you for verifying, Sergeant. Now, may I proceed?" "But wait, because this is where it gets interesting." Private Johnson stepped forward. Apparently hadn't heard or understood the phone call that just happened. Apparently operating on pure stubbornness now. "Wait a minute, Sarge." He held up his hand. Actually stopped his sergeant from raising the gate. "I don't care what anybody says on the phone. This lady is not in uniform, and she doesn't look like any colonel I've ever seen. Let that sink in for a moment." A private, overruling his sergeant, ignoring confirmation from the base commander's office, based on nothing but his personal opinion about what a colonel should look like. Sarah watched with fascination. This was perfect. A perfect example of everything wrong with Fort Henderson. Poor communication. No respect for chain of command. The kind of insubordination that only exists where standards have completely collapsed. "Johnson, get back to your post." Williams was hissing now. Embarrassed. Finally realizing they were dealing with someone who outranked them by miles. The base commander's office confirmed her identity. But Johnson wasn't backing down. He'd committed to his position. "Ma'am, you can't enter this base." Confident. Absolutely certain. "I don't care what some phone call says. Military personnel must be in proper uniform. Civilians need special visitor passes arranged in advance." Sarah could have ended this immediately. Could have demanded their commanding officer. Could have pulled rank and made this a career-ending disaster for both of them. But she saw something else. A teachable moment. An opportunity. "Private Johnson," she said. Voice calm, but taking on a more formal edge. "I appreciate your dedication to security protocols. However, I think there might be some aspects of military procedure you haven't fully considered." She pulled out her phone. Dialed from memory. Spoke clearly enough for both guards to hear. "This is Colonel Martinez. I'm at the front gate of Fort Henderson, and I need you to send someone to escort me to headquarters." "Yes, I understand there was a communication failure. No, I don't think disciplinary action will be necessary at this point, but we will need to review gate security procedures." The confidence drained from Johnson's face like water from a broken dam. Williams looked like he wanted to disappear into the pavement. "Gentlemen," Sarah said after ending the call, "in about 5 minutes, a vehicle's going to arrive to escort me onto this base. When that happens, you're going to see several senior officers who will not be happy. I want you to understand that how you handle the next few minutes is going to determine whether this becomes a learning experience or a career-ending mistake. But we were just following security protocols. We didn't know." "What you didn't know," Sarah interrupted gently, "is that proper military bearing and respect for chain of command are more important than blindly following rules you don't fully understand. When your sergeant received confirmation from the base commander's office, that should have been the end of the discussion." Williams was at attention now, finally showing proper military courtesy. "Ma'am, we apologize for any inconvenience. We should have handled this situation better." Sarah nodded. "Sergeant Williams, I can see you understand the problem. Private Johnson, what do you think you should have done differently?" The young private struggled for words. "Ma'am, I should have trusted my sergeant's judgment. Should have shown proper respect for your rank. That's a start. But the bigger issue is you made assumptions based on appearance rather than evidence. In the military, We judge people by their actions, their competence, their character, not by whether they look like what we expect. Think about that for a second. How often do we all make that mistake? Judge the book by its cover? Assume we know what leadership looks like. A black sedan approached. Sarah could see through the windshield, several officers in dress uniforms. This was about to become very educational. Major Harrison stepped out first, face flushed with embarrassment and anger. Behind him, Colonel Richards, the acting base commander, and Sergeant Major Thompson, whose expression suggested heads were about to roll. The contrast was stark, their crisp, professional appearance versus the slovenly condition of the checkpoint guards. Colonel Martinez. Harrison snapped to attention. Perfect salute. On behalf of Fort Henderson, I apologize for this completely unacceptable situation. We had no idea our gate security was operating with such lack of professionalism. Sarah returned the salute. Major Harrison, thank you for coming personally. I think this situation has been educational for everyone involved. Colonel Richards approached the checkpoint window, taking in every detail. The coffee cups, the magazines, the unkempt guards, the general disorder. His voice was cold when he spoke. Sergeant Williams, Private Johnson, explain to me how you managed to prevent your incoming commanding officer from entering her own base. The question hung in the air like a threat. Williams tried to explain, voice shaking. Sir, we followed security protocols and verified her identification, but Private Johnson felt that since she wasn't in uniform. Stop right there. Sergeant Major Thompson's voice carried 20 years of authority. Are you telling me that a private overruled verification from the base commander's office because he didn't like how someone was dressed? The situation was spiraling toward disaster. Sarah realized she needed to intervene before these two young soldiers destroyed their careers over what was fundamentally a systemic failure, not individual malice. Gentlemen, Sarah said, calm but commanding, I'd like to speak with you privately before any decisions are made about these soldiers. Richards looked surprised but nodded. Of course, ma'am. Johnson, Williams, you're dismissed to your quarters pending further review. Major Harrison will arrange temporary gate coverage. As the guards walked away, clearly shaken, Sarah turned to the three senior officers. I want to be clear about something from the very beginning of my tenure here. What happened today is not primarily the fault of those two young men. It's a symptom of larger systemic problems we need to address together. Harrison looked confused. Ma'am, with respect, they prevented you from entering the base and showed complete disregard for proper military protocol. They did, Sarah agreed. But they did it because no one had properly trained them. No one had communicated my arrival. No one had been maintaining standards at this checkpoint. No one had taught them how to think critically about security versus protocol. This is a leadership failure, not just an individual failure. Thompson nodded slowly. You're saying we need to look at why they felt empowered to behave that way in the first place. Exactly. Private Johnson felt confident enough to overrule his sergeant and ignore direct communication from the base commander's office. That tells me he's never been taught proper respect for chain of command. Sergeant Williams allowed security procedures to become so lax that this checkpoint looks like a college dorm room rather than a military installation. Richard studied her carefully. What are you proposing we do about it? I'm proposing we use this as a learning opportunity rather than a punishment opportunity. Those two soldiers are going to remember this day for the rest of their careers. We can make sure they remember it as the day they learned to be better soldiers. Or we can make sure they remember it as the day their careers were destroyed for making mistakes their leadership allowed to happen. The three officers exchanged glances. This wasn't what they'd expected from their new commanding officer. Ma'am, Harrison said carefully, are you saying there should be no consequences? Not at all. I'm saying the consequences should be educational and corrective rather than purely punitive. Private Johnson needs to learn about chain of command and military bearing. Sergeant Williams needs to learn about maintaining standards and supervising subordinates. Both need to understand their actions today could have had serious security implications. A remedial training program, Thompson said, nodding with approval, rather than disciplinary action. Combined with very clear expectations going forward, Sarah added, and a complete overhaul of gate security procedures, communications protocols, and standards enforcement across the entire base. As they talked, Sarah was already implementing her leadership philosophy at Fort Henderson. She believed most problems in military units stem from failures in training, communication, and leadership rather than individual character flaws. Her approach was to identify root causes and address them systematically rather than just punishing symptoms. The drive through Fort Henderson revealed the full scope of her challenge. Soldiers with hands in pockets. Uniforms that didn't meet basic standards. A general air of casualness that spoke to poor leadership and low morale. Richard seemed to read her thoughts. As you can see, ma'am, we have significant challenges across multiple areas. The previous commander left us with some serious issues we're still working to address. Sarah nodded, taking mental notes. Trash scattered around the commissary entrance. Vehicles in the motor pool with obvious maintenance issues ignored for weeks. Base housing showing signs of neglect. Major Harrison, Sarah said. How long since we had a comprehensive inspection or evaluation of base operations? About 8 months, ma'am. Harrison replied uncomfortably. The last inspection resulted in several areas marked unsatisfactory, but we haven't had the resources or leadership continuity to address all the identified problems. Thompson added, We've been operating in crisis management mode for the better part of a year. Every time we start making progress in one area, something else breaks down and demands immediate attention. Sarah understood this pattern, common in organizations where leadership had been unstable or ineffective. Without clear priorities and consistent standards, units found themselves constantly fighting fires rather than preventing them. Inside the headquarters building, Sarah was escorted to her new office. Functional, but showing the same neglect she'd seen throughout the base. Major Harrison, I want you to arrange a meeting with all department heads for tomorrow morning at 0800. I also want to meet with senior enlisted leadership this afternoon. Please have someone prepare a comprehensive briefing on our current personnel issues, training status, and operational readiness. Yes, ma'am. Harrison clearly relieved to have specific direction. Sergeant Major Thompson, I want you to personally oversee the remedial training program for our gate guards. Design something that addresses not just their specific mistakes, but helps them understand their role in overall base security and military professionalism. Understood, ma'am. I'll have a program outline ready for your review by end of business today. Sarah walked to the window and looked out at the base now under her command. 5,000 personnel. Significant responsibility. Substantial opportunity to make a positive impact. The problems were serious but correctable with proper leadership and sustained effort. Colonel Richards, she said, turning back, I want you to know I don't see the current situation as a reflection of personal failure on your part. You were put in an impossible position after the previous commander's departure. You've done your best to maintain stability. Richards looked relieved. Thank you, ma'am. It's been a challenging period. However, Sarah continued, I need you to help me understand how things got this bad. I need an honest assessment of the systemic problems, not just obvious symptoms. What happened to our standards? Why did discipline break down? How did we lose the pride and professionalism that should define a military installation? The officers exchanged glances. Understanding Sarah was asking for a level of candor that might be uncomfortable. She wasn't interested in polite explanations or bureaucratic excuses. She wanted the truth. Richards took a deep breath. Ma'am, it started with inconsistent leadership. The previous commander had a very hands-off approach. Delegated most decisions without providing clear guidance or expectations. When problems arose, the response was reactive rather than preventive. Over time, standards slipped because no one was consistently enforcing them. Harrison added, We also had several senior NCOs transfer out during that period. Created gaps in day-to-day supervision and mentorship. The replacement personnel weren't properly oriented to base standards, so they accepted whatever they found as normal. Thompson nodded grimly. The real problem was we stopped holding people accountable. When someone failed to meet standards, there were always excuses or exceptions. Eventually, meeting standards became optional rather than mandatory. Sarah listened carefully, understanding she was hearing about the kind of leadership failures that could destroy unit effectiveness and military readiness. The challenge now was reversing these trends without destroying morale or creating an atmosphere of fear and punishment. Over the following days, Sarah conducted her comprehensive review with methodical precision. She visited every major facility, observed training exercises, ate meals in the enlisted dining facility, spent time in the barracks talking with soldiers at all levels. What she discovered confirmed her initial assessment. Problems ran deep but weren't insurmountable. Training facilities were underutilized because equipment hadn't been properly maintained. The medical clinic was functioning, but operating with outdated procedures. The family housing area had maintenance backlogs affecting quality of life. Most concerning, many soldiers had lost confidence in their leadership and were simply going through the motions rather than taking pride in their service. Communication between different units was practically non-existent. Each department operated independently without coordination or shared goals. This explained how situations like the gate incident could occur. The fundamental problem, Sarah explained to her senior staff, is that we've been managing problems instead of leading people. Management is about maintaining the status quo, but leadership is about inspiring people to achieve excellence. She implemented what she called a foundation-first approach. Instead of trying to fix everything at once, she'd focus on establishing basic standards and procedures that would create a framework for long-term improvement. We're going to start with 3 fundamental principles, she announced. First, clear communication. Every important decision, policy change, or operational update will be communicated through multiple channels to ensure everyone receives the information they need. Second, consistent standards. We'll establish clear expectations for everything from uniform appearance to facility maintenance, and we'll enforce those standards fairly and consistently. Third, individual accountability combined with systemic support. Harrison asked, "Ma'am, how do we implement these changes without creating resentment among personnel accustomed to the current environment?" It was a perceptive question. Sarah had been thinking about this challenge since her arrival. "We involve people in the solution," she replied. "Rather than imposing changes from above, we're going to ask our soldiers to help us identify problems and develop solutions. People support what they help create." She'd already begun implementing this approach with the gate security situation. Instead of simply punishing Johnson and Williams, she'd assigned them to work with Thompson to develop new gate security procedures. They were required to research best practices, interview other base personnel about security concerns, and present their recommendations to command staff. The transformation was remarkable. Both soldiers threw themselves into the project with enthusiasm, clearly motivated by being trusted with real responsibility, rather than simply being punished for their mistakes. Their preliminary recommendations showed thoughtfulness and attention to detail that had been completely absent during their original interaction with Sarah. "Ma'am," Thompson reported with a smile, "Johnson and Williams have exceeded all expectations. They've identified 17 specific areas where our security procedures could be improved, researched how other installations handle similar challenges, and developed a comprehensive training program for all gate personnel. They've also volunteered to pilot the new procedures and serve as trainers for other guards." This was exactly the transformation Sarah had hoped to achieve. By treating the gate incident as a learning opportunity, rather than just a disciplinary matter, she'd converted 2 problem soldiers into engaged contributors to base improvement. She applied similar approaches throughout the base. Instead of simply ordering the motor pool to improve vehicle maintenance, she challenged them to develop a maintenance program that could serve as a model for other installations. Rather than mandating improvements to the dining facility, she asked food service staff to research soldier preferences and develop menu options that would improve both nutrition and satisfaction. The results became visible throughout Fort Henderson. Soldiers walked with better posture. Uniforms improved. Facilities were maintained more carefully. There was a growing sense of pride in the base's appearance and operations. But Sarah knew the real test was yet to come. Cultural change in military organizations required sustained effort over months and years, not just weeks. She needed to establish systems and procedures that would maintain high standards, even when she wasn't personally supervising every detail. "Our next challenge," she told her staff, "is to institutionalize these improvements so they become part of the base culture rather than just temporary responses to new leadership. We need systems that will maintain excellence regardless of personnel changes or external pressures." This meant developing comprehensive training programs, establishing clear promotion and recognition criteria, creating communication systems that would prevent future breakdowns, and building a sense of shared responsibility for base operations among all personnel. 6 months after her unconventional arrival at Fort Henderson, Sarah stood at the same gate where her command had begun. The transformation was remarkable. The checkpoint was spotless. Professional-looking guards snapped to attention and delivered crisp salutes. The same flagpole that had displayed a wrinkled flag now flew colors that were properly maintained and ceremoniously raised and lowered each day. Private Johnson, now promoted to specialist, was serving as senior gate guard for the morning shift. His uniform was immaculate, his bearing professional. His approach to security duties reflected the high standards that had become the norm throughout the base. When he saw Sarah approaching, he immediately stood at attention and delivered a perfect salute. "Good morning, Colonel Martinez," he said with genuine respect and pride. "All security protocols are current, and we have no issues to report." Sarah returned his salute with satisfaction. "Thank you, Specialist Johnson. How are the new training procedures working out?" "Excellently, ma'am. We've had 3 other installations send representatives to observe our gate security program. 2 of them have requested copies of our procedures manual. Sergeant Williams and I are scheduled to present our approach at the Regional Security Conference next month." This was exactly the outcome Sarah had hoped to achieve. Instead of being career-ending embarrassments, Johnson and Williams had become examples of how proper leadership and training could transform individual performance. Their success story had become part of the base culture, demonstrating that mistakes could be learning opportunities rather than permanent failures. As Sarah walked through the base, she saw evidence of transformation everywhere. The motor pool operated at peak efficiency, with vehicle readiness rates exceeding Army standards. The dining facility had received recognition for excellence in both food quality and customer service. The base housing area had become a model for other installations. Most importantly, the soldiers at Fort Henderson were displaying the kind of pride and professionalism that made military service meaningful. Retention rates had improved dramatically. Training scores were consistently above average. The base had earned recognition for operational excellence in several areas. The morning briefing included reports from various department heads about ongoing success stories. The base had not only recovered from its previous problems, but had become a sought-after assignment for military personnel who wanted to be part of an excellent organization. "Ma'am," Major Harrison reported, "we've received official notification that Fort Henderson has been selected to host the annual Regional Leadership Conference. The Pentagon specifically cited our transformation over the past 6 months as an example of effective military leadership." Sarah nodded with satisfaction, but she also knew the real measure of success wasn't external recognition but internal culture. The question was whether the changes they'd implemented would sustain themselves over time, through personnel rotations and changing circumstances. "Sergeant Major Thompson, give us an update on our leadership development programs." "Ma'am, we now have 43 personnel enrolled in advanced leadership training, including 15 who've been selected for promotion to senior positions at other installations. The program we developed here is being adopted by 6 other bases, and we've been asked to provide trainers to help implement it." This was perhaps the most satisfying aspect of Sarah's success at Fort Henderson. The leaders they were developing would carry these lessons to other installations, multiplying the positive impact far beyond the boundaries of their own base. Sarah had also implemented systems to ensure future leadership transitions wouldn't result in the kind of decline that occurred before her arrival. Comprehensive handover procedures, mentorship programs, regular assessment protocols that would identify potential problems before they became serious issues. The base now had clear communication systems that ensured important information was properly disseminated. Accountability measures that maintained standards without creating fear. Recognition programs that encouraged excellence while supporting professional development. As Sarah prepared for her own eventual transition to new responsibilities, she reflected on the lessons learned during her time at Fort Henderson. The most important insight was that organizational transformation required patience, consistency, and genuine belief in people's potential for growth and improvement. The gate incident that marked her arrival had become a symbol of the broader transformation at Fort Henderson. It demonstrated that first impressions could be misleading, that apparent failures often revealed systemic problems that could be addressed, that leadership was fundamentally about developing people rather than simply managing operations. Standing in her office, looking out at a base that now exemplified military excellence, Sarah felt proud of what they'd accomplished together. Fort Henderson had become proof that with proper leadership, clear standards, and genuine care for people, any organization could transform itself from mediocrity to excellence. The young guards who once prevented her from entering the base were now training others in professional standards and security procedures. The same principles that guided their individual transformation had been applied throughout the installation, creating a culture of continuous improvement and shared responsibility for excellence. Sarah's unconventional arrival had led to conventional success, measured not just in improved statistics and recognition, but in the personal and professional growth of thousands of military personnel who now understood that excellence wasn't just possible but expected. This was the true legacy of leadership, not just solving immediate problems, but creating systems and cultures that would continue to produce excellence long into the future. And it all started with 5 words spoken at a gate. "Ma'am, you can't enter." Sometimes the biggest transformations begin with the smallest confrontations. Sometimes the best leaders are the ones you don't recognize at first glance. And sometimes, just sometimes, being turned away is exactly the entrance you needed to make.